Hi, you're listening to the Voice of Reason. I'm Dr. Len Saputo. And this show is changing. This is the first of the evolutionary changes that we're going to be making on this show. What we've been doing up to this time in the last 40 or so shows is describing what's happening in the news, largely with COVID-19, but also with Black Lives Matter. And we have seen, and I have seen, after putting in 400 or 500 or 600 hours into studying this, some isolated things that don't seem to make any sense as we look at the scientific and the social side of what's happening. But as I've spent more time with it, I have found that a lot of these things are connected and in a way that surprised me. And what I'm saying is a way to start looking at what we're doing in a different way. And today we have with us Jared Dalen, who I've been working with over the past few months. And I'm impressed with how much he knows about just self-educating himself with the area of law and also with the area of politics and economics and what's happening today in the news. So Jared, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you.
Thank you for having me, Len. I appreciate it.
Well, tell us a little about yourself from your point of view.
Absolutely. I grew up in Northern Nevada around the Tahoe area,
Uh-huh.
and just grew up skiing and just a normal person. I'm no one special.
Well,
Um,
from the point of skiing, I think you are someone special since you skied on the Pro Tour and had
so
a wonderful career. My son David tells me you were an animal on that and did very well.
yeah, I've been in the ski industry for a long time in the area. Tahoe's very well known for great skiing and great skiers.
Uh-huh.
I've had a chance to compete with some of the best, and go all over the world and just experience life as I think we should.
Well, I bring it up because there's a discipline involved in sport that separates a lot of people from one another. Those that are successful are very disciplined. They're intelligent about how they go about learning their skill, and they adapt. And that's what's required today as we're looking at what's happening in the world. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so go on.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. And these things that have happened in my life have put me on a certain path, and I've started to recognize it over the last maybe 6 years or so since my son was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten in tune with it. And part of this is coming to certain realizations by having these things in my life. Like skiing, for example, has taught me certain disciplines and looking at things a little differently. And it's hard to explain unless you're a skier, but it changes, or the conditions change frequently, and being able to compete on a high level is rather difficult and challenging mentally and physically.
Yeah,
And
well, it teaches you about yourself and what you can do and how to
absolutely.
focus and do things within yourself. So I think you have accomplished something that's special. And I'm wondering how that has led you to be so interested in the work that you're doing now.
And part of this, my goal in life early on was to be a pro skier and to do that thing.
Okay.
And I took some time out of my life and I did some a real estate startup in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right before the market crash.
Okay.
And, my partner and I were all in filming high-end real estate in San Diego County. And we were
Mm-hmm.
doing very well. And within 8 months, we had 3 of the top 10 uh, agents in our pocket, and they loved us. And then the crash happened, and everything kind of blew up from there. And we lost everything we put into it. I moved back to Tahoe, Reno Tahoe area, and just kind of had to start it anew. And that was kind of my second birth, my awakening. And that caused me to look at things a little different, like why did this happen? And I think that's when I really started asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And 9/11 was kind of a primer to that, but the crash of 2008 was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak.
Sure. And where did that take you now? Those were opportunities, as it turns out. And what were the benefits and what are you doing now?
Well, I I just started asking myself some serious questions. How can this happen? Why
Hmm.
did it happen?
Sure.
And that natural curiosity took me through learning elementary law, how exactly they basically contrived the whole setup of the uh, 2008 financial meltdown. It was completely contrived. And if you go back into history and you look at the crash of 49
Hmm.
and Glass-Steagall and how that was repealed with Clinton and the banks were deregulated by Bush,
Uh-huh.
um, it was a perfect storm. Now, I'll probably use that a lot in this discussion because I'm seeing that today. As we've, in 2020, we've come through COVID, and now the George Floyd thing, the unfortunate thing with the police, and the civil unrest, and the quote unquote race war, which I don't quite believe that the mainstream media is being genuine about.
Oh,
Um, but it awoken my spirit, and I started asking myself questions that were very pertinent, and I just wanted answers, really.
mhm.
And I'm just an average person that was just inquiring that way. You know what I mean? Nothing special.
That's how it started. But I think that with the experience I've had with you, I know that you know a lot about this. Tell us how you see COVID-19. How has that been presented, and how is it in your experience?
Um, I'm going to go back a little bit to the measles scare of 2019. I thought that was
Okay.
really telling how they were treating that, how the media was treating it. And, and that was another thing I wasn't totally understanding of. So I just, we live in the age of information. Everything's at our fingertips almost. So I went in and I started reading everything I could on it and making those decisions for myself, whether it was really as dangerous as they were saying and all that. Well, come full circle, it just seemed really weird how the media was playing it and how New York was trying to take religious exemptions away, and they were using it as a crutch to move an agenda. And I think that's when I really started noticing that the virus thing could really be something for them to use as a tool to get us to do things they want us to do.
What do you think? What are some of those things?
Basically, more control over our lives. More tracking. The contact tracing that we've all heard a lot of.
Hmm.
These very things that invade our privacy that we are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights and the various constitutions in our union.
Hmm.
And they're all excuses, and it seems manipulated into a move into creating more control top down for these people over our lives, be it financial, social, just across the board, really.
Yeah, it's dividing us,
Absolutely.
and and we're in a place now where we have been divided to the point where we don't have much control over what's happening. I think there's a lot of information that's been published that's been called medical science. It's anything but medical science. It's stuff that's published it's just hard to believe that it is published in medical journals that is saying things that are taking down the natural things that we know work in healthcare. There are definitely solutions, in my opinion, to treat COVID-19. I don't think hardly anybody should be dying from this disease because we have treatments today that, in my experience, I know work, and they're in the experience of a lot of other people who are medical doctors who have done it. And it seems like they're trying to set the stage up to have us take a vaccine. And a lot of what's happened with that whole experience is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy where we're seeing people who have power move us in the direction of being dependent on that and with the threat of locking us down until the vaccine is available. How have you seen that from what you've studied? Do you see it the same way? Is there any other aspect that you'd like to add?
Absolutely. And coming full circle from the measles thing and watching
Okay.
this
Okay.
develop, from China, I watched it very closely from about mid-January. It caught my attention,
Me too.
especially after the Wuhan lockdown.
Yeah.
That's when I suspected that it was gonna be a big deal. Um, at that time, it's hard to tell with the information coming out of China what was, you know, legitimate information, but you try to gather what you can from what you have. And coming full circle, you know, it looks completely, I believe it to be real, but overblown, and more of a tool for them to allow them to do these certain things. The contact tracing, they're talking about digital currencies. Everyone, you know, the distancing from each other.
Yeah.
And these are very psychological control mechanisms that have a big deal on our psyche and how we interact with the public and people in our own family. You know, so it's really grand. It's hard to kind of explain in a couple sentences, but this whole year I feel has been very like contrived or concocted to make humanity move in a certain direction. And it may sound a little crazy, but if you actually look back in history, there's references made by very astute people such as Edward Bernays. And he was hired by a lot of, by like Rockefeller and Carnegie, I think, and some of these bigwigs for social perception. Because that's what, it's important what people think of these kind of people. And they didn't understand that, but Bernays did. He wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. And it basically says that there's a hidden mechanism in our society, and they know how to pull the wires that bind and guide the world using social forces. And this was known in the 20s and the 30s. So I feel like this whole thing with COVID is basically, that's what it is. You know, it's preying on those with, you know, lowered immune systems and whatnot. But the whole mask thing, the scare tactics, the media fear machine, is making people act a certain way. And if you go outside, you can see that. And
Yeah, we're
powerful.
self-policing. I mean, it's crazy. And that's sort of the kind of thing you see with fascism. Certainly what happened with the Nazis during World War II. And we see that starting to happen in this country now, and it's frightening to me.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they create this external fear, and, you know, a virus is one of those things that you can't see, taste, touch, feel necessarily, but we feel its presence by how people act. And if the media can make us feel that way, you know, that's very powerful in the sense that it changes our actions, our everyday actions. Right. And people will be locked down in their house for months.
Well, that's what's happened.
That guys, you know what I mean? It's amazing.
Well, I think that a lot of what's happened from the scientific point of view, in my mind, is a setup. There's a lot of lies. We don't even know the incidence of the disease. We don't know the number of deaths that are specifically related to it. We know that in January, as this disease was coming to this country, that we went down to a lockdown when there were only a few people who were ill. There were only a few people that were dying from it. And it wasn't just the US, it was the whole world. So it makes you wonder, who has the kind of power set up for that kind of response from governments, from countries, so that they all participate in something that seems to be a scheme. And that, to me, is one of the more frightening things about what we're seeing with COVID-19.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing to point out that's been kind of overlooked with the whole COVID thing is there's been almost no urgency to find patient zero. Because if it was truly a zoonotic transfer from animal to human, that would be very important information.
Yeah.
You know, on the research side, and practical implementation of strategies to combat it. You know, whether it be a lockdown or what have you. You know what I mean?
Well, we're locking down people who are healthy. We're not locking down the people who are sick.
Yeah,
that's kind of an odd thing to do. And the people actually who are getting COVID and dying from it now are not people who are outside. They're people who are in lockdown. That's where 2/3 of the cases are coming from. It's hard to believe that is what's happening, and we aren't respecting that, because we should get rid of the masks and have people outside. The people who are basically dying, most of them are from nursing homes. More than half of the people who have died are people who are ready to die anyway. And when you look at the overall number of deaths that there have been in this country since the start of that, it's not much different than it was last year or the year before or 10 years before that. So the point that you're making is that we're being led in a direction of fear. We've been separated and locked down. The economics of the country are terrible. People have lost their jobs, and they lost their health insurance, and they're about to lose their homes. So that kind of summarizes that for me. I'd like to know how you tie together what's happening with Black Lives Matter as an event that's correlated with COVID-19.
Absolutely. And this is something I've been paying attention a lot to this year. Like I said, it kind of started last year. My antenna was up, and it really caught on early this year with COVID. And I knew there was something going else behind it. And if you know, I've read and studied The Art of War, and I think it's an important book that people should read, because you can use it in everyday life. It's not necessarily about war; it's about strategy. And if you understand how a perceived enemy would look at you, in that regard, it's important to see how they would operate. And it's kind of hard to explain unless you've actually read some of it or you're familiar with Sun Tzu.
Okay, what's the bottom line of how you feel that has influenced you and taught you about what's happening today?
Well, how I feel about it is that everything is going in a certain order, and I'll go back to the fear thing. Okay. With the COVID, it's the media fear machine making us afraid of people we know going outside, having to wear a mask, and almost taking down our spirit. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And then put lockdown. And now we're stressed out because people have lost their jobs, or they're furloughed, or they got mortgage payments. I have 2 kids of my own, and it's a very stressful time, as it is. I'm sure it's been for many Americans. And you get into the George Floyd incident, and what a ripe opportunity for pissed off people to really come out. And people were already starting to protest the lockdown, but that was another good issue. But this is nothing new. Police brutality is nothing new. I watched the Kelly Thomas video years ago, and I was shocked.
Yeah, sure.
It's still one of the most amazing videos I've ever seen. I shouldn't say amazing, for horrific videos I've ever seen. Yeah, right. But just amazing in the sense that nothing happened to these people. Maybe that's for another talk, but on the upside, or on the grander side of things here, it just seems like these things are coming down the pipe, and they're aimed at the people to create division.
That's right.
And that's it. A huge part of the art of war is divide and conquer. Absolutely. And they've used that against the people for millennia. This side and that side, and in our society, it's left versus right. And unfortunately,
what do you mean left versus right?
Well, the liberal versus conservative, as it was today.
A political thing.
Politically, yes, left versus right. And historically, the classical liberal is actually the libertarian of today. So these words have been molded and changed over time too. But as we sit today, there's the liberal left and the conservative right.
Yeah.
I actually believe this to be a false paradigm in a couple senses. In the first sense, that the liberal left and the conservative right, I call it the quasi-conservative right, because they're still authoritarian in their own way. They just have a different brand about going about it. And if you really look at the synthesis of what they create over the last 160 years plus, it's the same. Big business still skyrockets. The war machine marches on. I mean, nothing really changes no matter how I feel about this. Nothing ever changes no matter who we put in this office. And I think, as Brene spoke, the people that really pull the strings that bind and guide the world are the ones controlling all this stuff. So to me, the left-right really is just a division tactic, to keep two groups fighting against themselves while other people kind of loot us from the rear.
Yeah, well, it's actually an undermining of our democracy, the way I see it, because when you have all of the left voting one way and all of the right voting the other way, that's unrealistic. If people are thinking for themselves, it's not going to be all or nothing, and it doesn't really reflect that they're representing the districts that they come from. So there's a better way to do this, and you talk about an up-down model. What do you mean by that? How does that contrast with the left-right paradigm?
Well, I believe the up-down model, and I'd like to thank Dr. Martinson for this, from Peak Prosperity. He was actually the person who I kind of adopted this from, and I thought it was brilliant. But the up-down model, you can call it good versus evil,
Okay.
integrity versus cowardice. I haven't figured out a good down part of that, a word to fit, but I think evil rounds it out pretty well. But
Yeah.
we should be looking for people who have integrity, who are willing to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Despite what they may gain out of it.
Yeah.
Spiritually, I believe that we need to get to a point where we see each other as one. And I personally don't believe I believe there's one race, one human race.
Yeah. Right.
And that we're all just a little different, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I see the beauty in it, and I think other people should see the beauty in that. And I know that's difficult. Not everyone has the same experience on this earth, and you have to take that in consideration as well.
Well, diversity is a good thing. It's
It is.
it's what makes us who we are, and we can be different. It's okay, but we should also be respectful and realize that these are our brothers and sisters. In fact, it's deeper than that. And when you look at it as a Unitarian way of looking at it, as a oneness, it's in stark contrast to the duality of how we look at how the world operates, because that's more of a narcissistic thing. It's competitive and adversarial. It's all about I, me, my, and mine, as opposed to sharing and giving and loving and building community. So I like your idea about the oneness, and I think that is what we should evolve into. And we are so far from that that it makes me sad.
Absolutely. And I do little things in my life, like when I see, no matter who they are, I call them a brother, or a sister, or it's how it's be the change you want to see in the world.
Oh, lovely.
One of the people I really admired in my studies is Gandhi.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that he was actually a British trained lawyer.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So yeah, he understood very basic law principles, obviously, and he spoke about allegiance, and that we should never give allegiance to evil, and no matter what its forms, and that no such government or entities deserve such allegiance, and that could be like I said, a government, it could be a corporation. The people have the power to make these decisions. And if we understand where all this dividing and conquering is coming from, and seeing pulling these strings, I mean, we could really make some waves in making positive change for our children and the future of humanity in general. But we have to come to terms with the fact that history is what it is. I look at history very objectively, and I try to understand how the people lived in that day. And I think a lot of people nowadays try to look maybe at even the United States past through 2020 eyes. And yes, we stole this land from people, and we brought over, and that's something we need to reconcile. We need to be honest with ourselves that those were huge mistakes. And we've grown from that. And that we're all Americans, and it doesn't matter what color your skin is. We all crave the same things. We crave love. We need oxygen, food. These are very, very simple things, but we tend to overlook our oneness with a lot of this stuff that is the same. That's very core to us living prosperous lives.
Well, I think we are overwhelmed with life, and especially with fear. There are so many things that seem to be happening that are beyond the control that we normally would have, with things that are challenging, that are serious. And it's hard to take a grassroots stand on all the things we're seeing, particularly when they take so much study. When you talk about COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter or any other challenge that we see in politics today, how are we, where does the average person get the time and interest and the commitment to solve these problems when they're busy with their families, they have economic problems that are a challenge, where our values should be seriously questioned because they're more about money and power rather than trying to do the oneness that you're talking about and building community? As long as we're overwhelmed like that, we don't respond as a human race until the horse gets out of the barn and we see what the potential things are that could happen to us. And when we appreciate that, boy, we're tough. Human beings are strong. We know how to unite. We know how to fight back. We know how to actually evolve to a higher level of consciousness, which is what's staggeringly necessary in the world today. And I think that's your point. You know, you've got to be the change you want to see, just like Gandhi said.
Absolutely.
How do you take that further and start talking about power and decentralization? What is all that about to you?
My study of American history, like I said, kind of came in through a weird part of my life with that crash. So when I started studying law, I actually started studying American history, how it coincided, because I wanted to go from the start, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And come into it that way.
Do you see centralization of power as a problem?
Yeah, I do. And if we look back in history, we can, look back to the Greeks and the Romans, and it was centralized power just hasn't worked out for humanity. And it actually makes more separation, I believe. And if we were to actually look at how a decentralized pattern would be, there's more checks and balances. And I think that was the genius of the American experiment. We were actually founded as a republic of republics, as Montesquieu put it, meaning that, each state was its own republic, and it was formed into a greater republic, which was the United States.
Yeah, sure.
And after the Civil War, we've centralized this power. And look what we've created. Yeah. Just absolute mess.
And the power of government is.
Oh yeah, it is. And we have the military force that can go all over the world and do as the powers dictate.
Yeah, sure.
And that's horrific to me. And I think the beauty of decentralization is the checks and balances, natural checks and balances.
Yeah.
Because no one country or thing can get too powerful to overwhelm everything else. And you've lived through the nuclear missile crisis in these crazy times in history.
Yeah. That
where massive governments were, at odds with each other, and the average person doesn't want any of this. We just want to love and be fed and live our lives. You know what I mean? Without the politics and the power grabbing and things of that nature. So in my eyes, decentralization is one of the key concepts to making positive change. And that's on a more macro level. On a micro level, personally, doing things that take out of their pockets that, these evildoers or whoever trying to perpetrate upon us. Don't do business with them. Your dollar is a vote.
Yeah, your dollars talk. The way you spend your money makes a big difference. It's what encourages people to have power, because you give your power away when you buy things that support the wrong premise.
Absolutely. And that takes a little bit of study to know who you're doing business with. But I think it's all worth it in the end if you truly want to make change, and if you want your family to have a better life than you did. And that's my motivation. Like I said, I have 2 children, and I'm very worried about the world that we're going to leave them in. And that's a lot of motivation for me to try to understand the world around me and see things maybe a little differently and try to make change. Because I think in order to make change, you have to step outside that box and question it. And it doesn't mean that everything in the box is wrong. It's just question anything that you think you know. You know, I think if you're able to receive new information and you're willing to do that, you're ahead of the game, and you're willing to make the changes needed to affect positive change.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, I'm wondering if you have any closing remarks. We've covered a lot of territory here. What message would you have for our viewers that they could adopt to try and make the world a better place and solve some of these horrible problems that we're facing now?
Absolutely. I think above all, be kind to your fellow human being. And I know it's hard being a human being. We have off days and this and that, but
yeah,
even with the mask thing going on, I personally wasn't wearing a mask, but I would smile at everyone no matter what. And I know there was a big divide even with the mask. You know, people wearing masks, they were getting in fights, and I think we just need to be good to each other. We need to realize that there's a problem, and just take it day by day. And I mean, you know, this year's a little crazy, and things are going by pretty fast. And and to think for yourself. You know, don't be too persuaded by the mainstream media. If things don't make sense to you, I mean, investigate, ask questions. You know, like I said, I started this whole thing by asking questions, and I think that's a great way to start, you know, any inquiry.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Well, I think that's a great way to look at things, and I'm impressed with the whole idea of trying to be evolutionary rather than revolutionary. It's not just about fighting everything. You know, we need laws when people don't come to the rescue themselves of doing the right thing, and we need laws, and we need a balance like we have in the government today, and that's a good way to be. And I like the idea of changing and having a spiritual aspect to this, like you're talking about. We are one, and if we act as one, and we do the things that we need to do that are right, and we work from the top down, like you say, it's good against evil in a lot of ways. Everything is going to change, and we are going to find a way of living together in more harmony and peace. So, Jared Dalen, thank you very much for joining us. You're all listening to The Voice of Reason. I'm Dr. Len Saputo. We're back listening to, you'll be back with another show tomorrow night. Thanks for joining us.